Could we make a start? Is everybody ready to start? Well, can I begin by saying a huge welcome and thank you to you for coming. We are very excited about having brought together so many practitioners in offender learning, so many people from academic, practical, voluntary sector, and personal experience viewpoints, and quite a lot of people who've traveled from considerable distances. I think the furthest is California. Congratulations, Emma, wherever she is. But we also, we had expected 4 people to come from Russia, but unfortunately they couldn't sort out their visas, but they've particularly asked to have full reports and all the papers. Let me do the practical details that have to be done first of all. As always, can I note that the fire escapes are very obvious through both sets of side doors. If you hear a fire alarm, a continuous fire alarm, then we will be escorted out. But if you hear an intermittent one, don't worry. Please, could you also make sure that any mobile phones or other electronic paraphernalia is switched off? And if you have any other practical questions or queries, the reception desk will be open during the day. So that's the practical things out of the way. The only other practical thing is, as an old adult educator, I always find serried ranks of tables and right angles really difficult. So if anybody wants to make the tables and chairs wonky, feel free. If it will make you more comfortable as an educator. So today we have an excellent panel of speakers and a very broad range of experience brought together. And we have one broad purpose: to explore and deepen a bigger idea of the potential, the reach, and the significance of offender learning. We know we're facing tough times. We know that there are economic pressures as well as many other pressures on the activity of working with prisoners and other offenders to help them learn, help them change, help them reform and rehabilitate, and help them resettle successfully. And we know that prisoners, offenders themselves, are absolutely crucial partners. I'm delighted there are a few people with the experience of being prisoner learners here today, and they may or may not choose to disclose from that viewpoint. Either is absolutely fine. But in tough times, it's all the more important that we hold on to the biggest possible vision and concept of what we're about. And in particular, that we can make the public value case for offender learning and make the wider benefits case. And for that reason, we in the Prisoners Education Trust were delighted that such distinguished and expert figures as our keynote speaker and many others who are speaking today paid attention to these themes in the inquiry into the future of lifelong learning. The focus in that inquiry, which was covering the whole of lifelong learning, the focus in that inquiry on crime and lifelong learning produced 2 stimulating and thoughtful papers. And so we seized the opportunity to give those papers a public launch and profile through today's conference, but more importantly, to bring the themes that they address into the context of the practice of what we do. And that's what we'll be able to do during today, recognizing that offender learning is made up of both the crucial and highly prioritized statutory provision, but also the many efforts made by voluntary agencies and all the work that's done out of what our researcher, whose report is in your pack, calls goodwill and good fortune, in terms of getting as much learning happening in prisons and with offenders more generally. So it's those big themes of public value and wider benefits and the case for offender learning that we hope will run through today and be addressed in all sorts of different ways in the debate groups, in the plenaries, and in the presentations. I'm going to introduce Tom Schuller in a minute, but before I do, I'd like just to ask you to ponder for a moment, what is it about this theme that attracted you? What is it about the theme of lifelong learning and prisoners that made you think that today might be worth coming to? What does that idea of lifelong learning mean to you, and how does it link up with what comes to mind when you think of prisoners? And perhaps just for 2 minutes, introduce yourself to somebody sitting close to you whom you haven't met, and just for a minute or two exchange, what is it that this theme means to you and what attracted you to come today? So be quick.
You started when we were sitting up here saying this is an old stomping ground. actually slightly less thanks for reminding me of my age, because I actually did my PGC at the Institute, but in fact in those days the Institute of Education was in Senate House across the way, so that was before this building was even put up. So slightly fewer thanks for reminding me of my longevity. And actually this platform must have been used to give very many lectures about education of one kind or another. And it does remind me, if I just take 2 minutes, on a little story about 3 people, a Dane, a Norwegian, and a Swede, who were traveling abroad somewhere, and they were kidnapped and told that they had 24 hours to live. But they each would be given one wish, which would be granted before they were killed. And so the kidnapper turns to the Dane. This is about national stereotypes, by the way. Turns to the Dane and says, so what's your wish? And the Dane says, oh, I'd like 6 bottles of ice-cold Tuborg, please. And so kidnapper rustles up from somewhere 6 bottles of ice-cold Tuborg, and the Dane starts glugging his way through. And the kidnapper turns to the Swede and says, and what is your last wish? And the Swede says, I'd like to give a lecture on adult education. And the Norwegian says, kill me now, please. So I'm not giving a lecture on adult education. I'm going to say something about this topic. I do want to say at the beginning that I'm certainly one of the people here who has least direct experience of prison education. But when I came to take over as director of the inquiry, there were a number of themes which I'll show you already established for the inquiry. But the one addition I made to that set of themes was this issue of crime and offender learning. It seemed to me absolutely crucial area, both because of the numbers of people that are affected by it, but also for the wider implications that it has for a whole range of adult learning issues. And that's why I'm really pleased that we've got this conference today, and that Pat and all of you and Maren have paid such attention to the paper. So what I want to do is try and briefly give you the context of the inquiry within which the paper was developed, say some things about the sort of framework, and then include in that some of the practical suggestions and recommendations that we make. Now, you as an audience don't need reminders of these, but I'm just giving them as context. The incredible steep rise that we've had in the prison population, the projections that this is still going to go on, and these figures are quite recent projections. I would say, actually, that although the UK has an unusually high level, and you certainly know this, of proportion of the population in prison, that growth rates are happening in most other EU countries, which I think is a serious trend. So there is a wider debate to be had about this. But that is the rather bleak background. And you'll also know this, but it is, I think, really important to remind ourselves that such a high percentage of the prison population are in there for reasons that probably have rather little to do with their crime and much more to do with their state of physical and particularly mental health.